And another 5-second wait. Hi, everybody. This is Brendan Baylod, and welcome to Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. You're here with us on the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group, and we're really glad to have everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody who is new to the group that has just joined recently. Feel free to make your comments here. Let us know you're there. We'd like to hear from you. My gosh, do we have a great show in store for you tonight? This is a show that I've been waiting for quite some time. We have a really distinguished guest on the show this week. It's somebody that I've kind of looked up to for many years as a somebody that I aspire to in terms of shipwreck hunting. It's none other than Dave Trotter. Dave is, for those of you, the few of you who may not know Dave is probably one of the most, if not the most prolific shipwreck hunter on the Great Lakes. He's, I suppose one might say Jim Kennard is the Lake Ontario version to what Dave is to Lake Huron. I think Dave has found more wrecks than anybody on Lake Huron. And also Dave is a real link to our early, sort of history of finding shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. He was a person who hung around with the likes of John Steele and Kent Bellrichard. And so a real important piece of not just, telling shipwreck stories and diving stories and wreck hunting stories, but connecting to our history. So Dave, my gosh, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Brendan.
So
good to be here.
Great to have you. So a couple of housekeeping things I want to take care of. First of all, I want to give a shout out to my friends Chris Roxburgh and Dusty Cliffman. Those guys went out to the Fox Islands last weekend. If you'll remember the online shipwreck festival, I did my talk about the filthy with shipwrecks, the filthy foxes, and they have just a ridiculous density of shipwrecks. But many of them have never been looked at or identified. And Chris and Dusty went out there and they dove them and they filmed them and flew a drone over them. And they had just crystal clear water and glass calm conditions. So great job, guys. And thanks so much for doing that. They've given us a couple of mysteries. What we thought was a schooner is actually a steamer. We're trying to figure out what that one is. And we've got a little unknown tug of about 60 feet, a steam tug. We have no idea what it is. There's no historical, it ain't supposed to be there. So nice job, fellas. On a sad note, we lost a member of the Great Lakes shipwreck community. I wanted to share with you that a friend of ours and a guy who was instrumental in so many areas on the Great Lakes shipwrecks, passed away recently. And that is Paul Bentley. Many of you will recognize Paul from his work with Kim Stabelfelt at the Ghost Ships Festival and also in a lot of the Milwaukee area shipwreck surveys. Paul was not a big time researcher or wreck hunter, but he was just a nice fellow and a guy who did a lot behind the scenes to support the Great Lakes shipwreck community, and he'll really be missed. So, my condolences to Paul and his friends and family. All right. So I think that's most of it. One other thing I wanted to mention is that I've been doing these programs weekly for quite a while now. I can't even remember how long it's been. I think I've had 15 guests or something like that. I'm going to start to scale back a little bit for two reasons. One, it's summer, and if you're not out on the lakes diving or looking for shipwrecks, you should be. And secondly, the plague is starting to, we don't know that it's starting to lift, but they're starting to reduce a lot of the things that are closed. So people are getting out. So I'm going to scale the show back to probably every other week initially, and then maybe once a month until the winter, and then we'll resume again with a more regular schedule. So I don't believe I'm going to have a show next week, and then I probably will have one after that. So lastly, feel free to ask questions during the course of the talk. If there's one that we want to take, I'll throw it up there for Dave to talk about. We do have a lot to talk about. We may run over a little bit tonight. If we do, that's all right. You don't get to talk to Dave Trotter every day. And then lastly, we are probably going to do a Zoom room again tonight. after the show. It'll be a short one, but I'm going to post that immediately after the show. We'll get that up there. And for those of you who want to have some socialization, maybe over a couple of beers in the Zoom room, feel free to join us. So without further ado, Dave Trotter. So I usually ask everybody the same question to start out, because most foremost, people want to get to know who you are and what your background is, and get a taste for kind of what fuels your interest. So Dave, it's an unusual thing. There are not many of us that do this. How did you get interested in this? How did you get started?
Well, actually the diving part started in the 60s, Brendan, when I lived in Georgia. And I always remember that very well because I took one of the courses by the YMCA. That's all it taught it at the time. And got about halfway through it, the guy says, "You look pretty good. You want to go diving?" so never completed. Had moved shortly after that. Never completed a standard certification course, and anyway, ended up doing that and moving up into the Great Lakes when I worked for Ford Credit. And from there, I got more involved in the idea that, gee, there's shipwrecks out there and they're just neat to dive. And I had also decided to become an instructor, which I did for about 10 years. But I found that instructing interferes with the more fun things in life, which is wreck hunting and diving. So that lasted for a while. But from there, I got very involved with just the whole technology of the game in the early stages. And that'll be some evidence. You'll see that certainly in some of the stories that I share with you tonight. So basically, I taught for 10 years, gave it up so that I could pursue what I really love with the mystery of discovery and exploration of missing Great Lakes shipwrecks.
And that's something that you were tremendously successful at. I wish we had time to talk about Klein side scan sonars and some of the other things that you really are an expert at. But I know one of the things that you really kind of cut your teeth on that I thought was so interesting is the cam loops, and doing some of the first dives ever done on that with John Steele. I mean, that's got to have just been a thrill, Dave. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
That was, we got together with Larry Copeland and John Steele, Bill Coors, and a couple of friends of mine, and we decided to make a trip to Isle Royale. And this is in a little 22-foot Starcraft and a 25-foot Thompson. The only thing you got to compass. This was back before you had any kind of digital equipment for running from A to B. Wow. And so we ran across from Keweenaw Point over to Isle Royale. And the year before, I think it was Jerry Elyson and maybe been Ken Merriman had found the cam loops and done very little diving on it. We were there, and fortunately, we were able to get on it and had some pretty neat experience. Now, you got to remember, this is all air diving. I should bring that up. That's not an insignificant issue when these wrecks are laying, 200 plus feet or 250. And we had quite an experience there of diving with John. That you can see the binnacle on the stern of the cam loops. That was pretty interesting to see it. That's in the high point as she lays bowed down into the mud at about 260. But I had a chance to dive. This I consider one of the unique pictures that I got. I ran with an old Nokonis 2 and using this thing with a couple of surface-mounted strobes that were encased in underwater housing, and got a picture of John entering the Kamloops engine room for the very first time as we'd managed to open one of the skylights. And that's John with his old 16-millimeter camera moving inside. Now, John was kind of an interesting character. He's really one of the icons of the early Great Lakes search and discovery and diving game. And John used to wear a 3/8-inch wetsuit that was kind of torn. He wouldn't wear any weight belt because he had a problem with his back, and he just pulled himself down the line. And it's quite a different set of diving events and techniques that those people employed back then. And I learned a lot from John and Larry about how to dive and dive safely under very marginal conditions, particularly when you're in a condition where you're pretty well narked up with narcosis.
Wow. So you guys were the first people to go down into that engine room.
Yeah, we were. We got the door open, And that turns out to be that would be the first image ever taken of the crewman that was still on duty in the engine room.
So that's the chief engineer. I don't believe that that's shown very often, but I don't believe he's there anymore in very good shape. So this is how he appeared when he was first found.
That's right, exactly. Because I was the first. I followed John in and managed to take an image. You could see him. He was kind of translucent, and it was very, with a little bit of light from the camera and from your underwater light, it was very reflective. So it was very easy to see that he was there.
I know. I remember hearing stories about that. John, the first time I ever met him, he gave a talk where about him and Kent Bellrichard being on the bow of the Kamloops and trying to tie a line onto it, and I think that's in around 250. And on the film, all of a sudden you hear this explosion and glass flies everywhere, and their light had exploded just as John finished tying his regulator into the mooring line, and he managed to free himself in 245 feet of water on air and rescue himself to the surface. I mean, it's amazing stuff those guys did.
John actually made 2 trips to Isle Royale that year because he wanted to go back and shoot some more film, and I think that's when Kent was with him. My experience was with the first time that we managed to make the dive it. And of course, back then it was pretty much open in the sense that Isle Royale had very loose controls, and you could go out there and pump tanks anytime, anywhere. And of course, we all had, a couple of us had small 3 CFM compressors in order to fill tanks. But the typical setup of equipment was double 72s and a pony bottle, and that's how you dove. Not true for John Steele though. John used to dive what we call the Coke bottles, low pressure Coke bottles, because John had a bad back and the weight bothered him a lot. So he was always looking to lighten up the load on his back, getting in and out of the water.
Yeah. And for those of you who are, sensitive about such things, the wreck is a grave site, and, we don't show the image to sensationalize it by any means, but to show that people really did lose their lives on those ships, and they're still there. So Dave, I don't know if show that picture, but I thought now that nobody's seen it for a few years, I thought I'd bring it up. That's right. I've never seen it either, so I think it's appropriate. So I certainly appreciate it. So Dave, I think the next major thing that I know you found a lot of wrecks, but one of the big, real iconic finds of your career, obviously, is the Daniel J. Morrell. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that? What got you interested in finding her, and tell us a little bit about the story?
Yeah, I'm glad to. The Morrell, if you looked at 3 major shipwrecks in Great Lakes history that have occurred in the last 40 or 50 years, got the Bradley in Lake Michigan, the Fitzgerald in Lake Superior, and the Morrell in Lake Huron. Morrell broke in 2 in 1966, sank, and there was only one survivor, Dennis Hale. One of the pieces of equipment that I acquired early on was a device called the Loran C. And it's really a precursor to what we use today, GPS for everything. They had ground-based stations. What I mean by that is the signals came from antennas that were mounted in 3 positions around the certain points in the lakes or further down into Florida. That device was very difficult to use initially. It was not easily understood, and the other thing is it was not terribly accurate. But we wanted to go out and find the bow of the Morrell, the stern of the Morrell, which had been located by the Coast Guard several years earlier. Not too far after the Morrell had sunk, in January, they found the stern of the Morrell. Well, to get out there preceding any positioning device, you had to be capable of running out 12, 14 miles out on the lake and go out and pick a spot. Well, anybody that's boated much without navigation devices understands positioning is not easy to do at that point. So with the Loran C, I was able to calculate the approximate position of what we knew to be the stern of the Morrell, and I had to offset that calculation against the Port Austin Reef Lighthouse because there was an inaccuracy built into the system because of the signal transmission that occurred over great distances. So in theory, I put together the new position of the stern of the Morrell, and we walked out there on a cold May very early May, cold Sunday morning, perfectly flat. And we zipped out there and walked up on the spot that I thought in theory it should be. We put the old transducer to the Westmar unit over the side, and it ran a circular and ran just about like radar. That's one of the old systems that we used to use. And it'd ping out. And sure enough, we had a target. And that target just fascinated us because we really walked out there and we got within 1,000 feet of what we were looking for. And finally, the only one way to prove that was to put a diver down. So we grappled in and put a diver down. And this is Saginaw Bay. This is terrible. You can't see 3 feet. So anyway, he walked around, he stumbled around a little bit, come back up. And then I went down and I stumbled around a little bit and managed to get the grapple hook over next to a wire. And finally, Larry Copeland walked that wire down and over to the stern or over to the smokestack of the of Morrell, and we knew we'd found the Morrell, and he tied off a mooring line and came back up, did the decompression, and we were just as happy as we could be. We could not believe we'd actually found the stern of the Morrell by applying this technology.
Wow.
It was still about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What the heck? The water's still flat. What do wreck hunters do? We went searching. We moved 5 miles away. Within 30 minutes, we had another target. That other target ultimately turned out to be the other half of the Daniel J. Morrell. So we actually found both halves on the same day. And that picture that you see now with that searchlight covered with silt, I took a camera on the very first dive and shot that image of a diver looking at it for the first time since she sunk.
Wow. So you didn't use a side, was the Westmar a side scan unit that you found it with, Dave?
Yeah, it is. It's a pinger type side scan. If Paul Ehorn, when you get him on, he'll talk about an ELAC, but the principle's the same. It sends out a ping, and just like the old submarines used to use for looking for targets. And if you get it the right kind of conditions, that thing will work about trying to detect a shipwreck. They're very cumbersome, very difficult to use, and not with a great amount of success. The only time that really the Great Lakes game changed with the advent of Klein side scan sonar and actually my purchase of one in 1983. That just changed the dynamics of the whole game, along with positioning equipment such as Loran C that allowed you to do meticulous work that you were incapable of doing before that.
Well, that really speaks to a guy like John Steele and his abilities. You know, I went out with Steve Radovan with one of those old Westmars, and we used to call it the popcorn machine because you didn't see it, you heard it. It was making like pop, and when you went by a wreck, it would go.
Yeah, exactly. And many a times we were out searching before I had that equipment. We'd be using the Westmar unit, and you didn't have to see it; you just wanted to listen to it.
So this is the bell.
Yeah, it's the bell on the Morrell as we found it.
Wow, I mean, there's nothing on it; it's just clean.
Yeah, of course, you're talking 79. This is a classic. To me, this is one of those classic shots that happened by, I won't call it by accident, but basically that's the exact position we found the wheel in the pilot house, the chart table leaning against it, and the broken wheel. And I look at that, and it's just such a reminder of the violence of this ship when it sunk, certainly the bow as well as the stern.
Definitely.
I should mention that last year, Brendan, we've been doing a lot of additional work with a fellow by the name of John DeBeck. And what's happened is we developed a lot more knowledge and information about the loss. We've had more divers down doing Pacific survey work. We did more side scan work. And we're developing that into a program that is going to be part of the Whitefish Point display. They're going to do an exhibit on the Daniel J. Morrell here in September 11th, 12th, and 13th. It's kind of a major deal. They've really put some effort into telling the story about the Morrell, and there'll be a good number of people up there related to the Morrell that will be participating in this event. So it's open to anybody who wants to come up and see the true story on the Morrell.
Very neat, Dave. Good too that they've got you participating in that. So the next thing that I know the next major find that I think we talked about really interested me is a really early ship, the Propeller Goliath. And that's just an amazing find. And there's not, she's kind of low to the surface, but these interesting propellers. Can you tell us about how you found this one and a little bit about this ship's history?
Yeah, the steamer Goliath was built in 1846 and was lost with all hands in 1848. Now, what's unique about she's about 115 foot long. You see there's an image up there now of what she looked like as we found her. And the events, of course, surrounding that is she was upbound, caught fire, and was carrying 205 kegs of blasting powder for the mines up in the UP. So when she went, it was not pretty. But the interesting about her is that the mechanical design is a Ericsson designed propeller system, and John Ericsson developed the propeller and patented it in 1840 with twin propulsions blades at the stern, and they were counter-rotating. And this man was quite a talented designer and inventor. And so they had this particular design on this new ship. It lasted 2 years, so when she sank in the explosion, we are now looking at the oldest mechanical propulsion system you could find in the Great Lakes for stern-driven vessels. And how linked is that to the rest of history? John Ericsson was involved in the development and design of the Monitor, of Civil War fame. So here we have an actual mechanical design that is 15 years preceding the Monitor in the Civil War.
Wow. That is really, something. I think there's one other propeller from the steamer Independence that's just sort of on display up at the Whitefish area at the Sioux. They dredged it out after the Independence was lost. They only found a propeller and they dredged it out. And I've seen that, and they look just like these. They got an circular oval that's attached at 3 points. And then you got blades that are on the outside of it. Of course, they're angled and twisted to drive the ship. I think there's probably one other propeller system that designed that way. One other system that is that way. That's somewhere else in the U.S. But outside of that, this doubled the number known of Ericsson screws that you would actually be able to see. Very cool. So how did you go about finding that? That looks like it was a pretty tough find, pretty low profile. Is this something you used the Klein for?
Well, yeah, we did. We found it with the Klein in '84, as I recall. But it was a happen chance find. If you look at a lot of the information, there were a couple different positions that she was supposedly to have been sighted and floundered in. And so we were surveying an area looking for shipwrecks, and she still happened to be within the grid we were surveying.
Gotcha.
Now, when we found it, obviously we knew what we had when you start to look at those Ericsson screws.
Right. Not too many other vessels like that.
No.
So I know for you kind of though, the holy grail that you looked for many, many years and found many other shipwrecks in the pursuit of was the Minnedosa. How long did it take you to find this ship? And tell us a little bit about the story behind it.
Sure. Well, we started searching for the Minnedosa in 1978. And the information on it was extremely accurate in the newspaper. It was 8 miles northeast of Harbor Beach and 120 feet of water. That's about as good as you could get. Okay. Yeah. Well, so much for what the truth was. So anyway, we poked around for that for years and kept working different areas. And of course, once we had the Loran Sea, it allowed us to work a little more effectively on going back to different areas. And anyway, back and lost the train of thought here. We worked on her from 78 to 83. And then acquired the Klein side scan unit, and that allowed us to be much more effective in survey work. And so we would set up the grid blocks, complete the grid blocks, get the job done, move to the next one, and we still couldn't find it. And at some point, I figured we must have missed it, which is entirely possible. If you ran survey, there's a lot of human factors involved. There's equipment and the whole 9 yards. And so about 1990, I sat back and said, well, maybe if I didn't miss it, let's assume that I'm okay. Where would I think it would be? And I discounted all the historical information, except for one thing. I thought she was north of Harbor Beach. And the reason I thought she was north is the surviving ships had come into Harbor Beach at the time. And if they had been way south of Harbor Beach, they would have went down to Port Sanilac to get shelter. So with that in mind, we served for the next 3 years, and I kept working further and further out into the lake, way out in the lake, and a lot further than the guys wanted to go because we're now well over 200 feet. Yeah, so the weekend before we found it, and this is one of those twists of fate, the weekend before we found it, we had been surveying, got caught in a storm at 2 o'clock in the morning, managed to pull the cable and the fish in, got in around 5 o'clock in the morning just dead, and slept and wrapped it up and went home and came back the next weekend. Well, I looked at that last survey line that we had completed in the prior weekend, and I said, that thing's a pretty lousy job, and we ought to clean it up and go back and do it right because I can't afford to miss it. So we went back and ran that survey line, and then when we completed the grid that I had laid out, we were at the wrong end of the grid to go to the next grid that we were going to search in. So I added one line to that survey grid. And these are 8-mile lines. And about the 6.5-mile point of that 8-mile line, we had a target. The target turned out to be the Minnedosa. So wow. I had it right, but I was one line short until we ironically we added that extra line. And that's why I call it kind of a twist of fate.
Man, you came within a hair's breadth of missing it. Yeah,
you're right. And I would have never gone back to that area very quickly because it just didn't seem. Here we are in 220 feet of water. We're 16, 18 miles out. And you got to remember the last reported accurate position was 8 miles from shore and 120 feet.
I never trust those real accurate positions. And so, what a big ship. I mean, she was just a monstrously large 4-masted schooner.
Yeah, 4-masted, 250 feet long, just a lot of lumber on the bottom and a lot of lumber on the surface.
So here you guys are back in the day when you found her. Is that wet paper on that graph there?
Yeah, that's real. That's real wet paper used with the early Klein side scans. That's myself in the plaid shirt. There's Rudy on the left and the Werner the dock. And way back behind the dock is Danny Fader, who's in this next story about the steamer Detroit.
Very neat picture there. And so this is you going down?
Yeah, I put that in there because it's a reminder to me that was the first guy. I said, we think it's Minnedosa, and I'm going to be the first guy to touch that damn thing one way or the other. And so I took the mooring line, and we grappled in, and I took the mooring line there, and that was my prepping for the very first dive. Now, again, these are all air dives, so, you don't think too clearly at times.
Look at that zebra muscle.
Yeah. And the MTC above that, you can see the remains of the name Minnedosa, but MTC was Montreal Transportation Company. Just further affirmation that it was, of course, the Minnedosa.
Wow. So you finally found her after all those years. And
only 15 years.
And so after that one, of course, was probably one of your most iconic finds. And there's quite a story that goes with it, of course. And it's the steamer Detroit. And what a beautiful sidewheel steamer.
Yeah, she was. And she is majestic underwater, too. She was just a perfect specimen of a ship that sank very gently and very quietly as she descended to the bottom. With the paddle wheels in place, just a really very unique sight. Matter of fact, she had the steering pole on it 140 years later.
Wow. And
with the ball on the end of it.
And Bob Mcgeehan does such a great job with these drawings. He's done many drawings for you, and this is really one of his iconic pieces.
Yeah, it is. While we were just tickled to death to have found it, she ended up causing events that were unforeseen that, of course, you look back on and you wish you certainly didn't have to recount those events. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And that's Bob Mcgeehan's drawing of the steamer Detroit. She lays on the bottom today. And that's in a kind of a codolith format, which is reverse of black and white. And just a great amount of detail from Bob's work. And back then, visibility was pretty bad. So it was Bob's artwork that was so useful in trying to give perspective to some of these ships that we found, because we're seeing 3, 4, 5, 6 feet at a time max, and not good 6 feet necessarily either. And Bob could take he could take the information as we discuss it and parlay that into a tremendous drawing of what it looks like on the floor today.
So how deep was is the Detroit then?
I think the Detroit was, I think 175 or 180.
Okay, so not much visibility down there, really.
No. And the thing that was very evident, you put a diver down. That's one of the best days we ever had there. I managed to take a picture of both those anchors still hanging up right off on their flukes right at the bow. The steering pole's coming directly out underneath me. No, and trouble is that once you swam by that with all the silt, the visibility even got considerably worse. One of the standing jokes that we had, Brendan, was had a diver down there, and he came up to the anchors. He saw them. He left them. He come back. He saw them again. And he's still trying to get back to the mooring line. He left and he saw him again. He's the only guy that ever saw 3 sets of anchors on the steamer Detroit. But the one of the things we found that really piqued our interest and got the old blood churning was a safe or a strong box. And you see right there the diver illuminating the strong box we found probably in the purser's office. And that turned out to be a very sad event, because the result of that is that our attempt to do things with the safe caused a very bad accident that Danny Fader was involved in. And by the grace of God, he survived, but equally, he could have just soon have died. There's great detail to it, which there's no point in getting into now, except it's a graphic reminder that diving is not a risk-free sport.
And Danny, obviously, the book Shipwreck Hunter is an excellent book, and I'll put up a slide of that at the end. But for those of you who want to read a really excellent account, that book is available on Amazon. I think it's only available in used copies now. But
yeah, it's out of print, but they are available on Amazon or eBay, either one. And most people call it a good read.
It is. I really enjoyed it. It's let's see here. Let me bring it up. I don't want to jump around too much, but anyway, the safe then. This last picture is interesting. Well, was there anything in it?
Yeah. Well, we were, as I mentioned to you, this event, it really caused just a heartfelt experience of losing somebody, nearly losing him entirely, but all out of diving, damaged physically, the whole 9 yards. And we were very despondent over that. And we had already moved the safe about 60 feet off the side of the steamer. Now, you got a picture. This is 1994. Visibility is not good, and it's even bad when you're on the bottom, worse on the bottom, of course. And so it was about 50 feet off the side of the steamer. And we actually left it for 3 years before we ultimately went back to get it. So it's kind of unique if you think about it. How many people can leave a strong box sitting on the bottom for 3 years? Yeah. So anyway, we went. All of a sudden, one day we decided, let's go get that sucker. And so out we go and put a guy in the water. He goes down. He ties that thing off, and we've got to lift it up and be careful not to hang it into the shipwreck the whole 9 yards. And starts to come up on the back of the boat, and it's hanging off the aluminum platform, and the aluminum platform had a very sharp edge to it. And everybody's just beat from hauling this thing up. Now, I got a camera in my hand, so I'm having a great time. I think this is just funny. This is great excitement for everybody. And so they look over the side, and they see where the rope had just about sawed through that was holding the safe. And there was a mad panic to grab the whole safe and force it up on the back of the boat. Well, since we hadn't thought this out real well up to that point, the next question is, how do you get in the safe? So pretty soon all my tools are being pulled out and put on the back of the boat, and they're flipping over the side and into the water one after another as all these people that had who had gold fever were after the contents of the safe. I considered it quite a humorous experience. But once we opened it up and put our hand down into the water and the silt and the muck, there was nothing in it. But we left that sucker for 3 years. If you think about it, that's kind of unusual.
Yeah, not many people would. So, and of course, were there any repercussions? Did you put it back, or what finally happened?
Yeah, we dumped it. If we ever got into a discussion about who owns what on the Great Lakes, I can assure you the state does not own what they think they own, and that's been proven legally several times over.
Yeah, the Abandoned Shipwreck Act covers embedded wrecks that are abandoned, not wrecks that have had insurance claims paid on them, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right.
There's a lot of people who just automatically assume that every wreck is de facto covered, and they aren't.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right, Brendan. It's it is what it is, and if you ask somebody at the state, they'll tell you they own it. Well, the fact is, they sure are going to have to prove it if somebody wanted to take them to court over an issue.
Yeah, and of course, not many people want to get involved in that anymore. And to be frank, the states don't want to anymore either. That what they don't want is they don't want people nickel and diming the wrecks. But
no, I'm not an advocate of pulling stuff up, Brendan. It's it does nothing except remove stuff that's interesting for all of us as divers to enjoy. That being said, I don't know many people that leave a safe on the bottom without knowing the contents.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so I think we've seen a real change on both sides, on both the state and the driver's side. So fascinating story, Dave. So the next one that we are going to talk about is quite a find, the Frank H. Goodyear. I mean, this was a huge steamship. Tell us a little bit about this one, Dave.
Yeah, it was a 434-foot steamer that was downbound, carrying iron ore, collided with the James P. Woods back in 1910, and she went down fast. I mean, this was a horrible collision, and she sank virtually immediately. And there were only 3 or 4 survivors, and just a horrible tragedy. Everybody that went down, the hatches blew off the top. The captain survived. The cook survived, and I think 1 or 2 others. And lost there was Cook lost his wife and also lost a child that was on board at the same time.
Oh man!
She remained a mystery and of interest because her accident changed the navigation in the Great Lakes. It was such a horrible loss, such a horrible tragedy, that they then began to develop alternatives of what they did for navigation, which is instead of having an upbound and downbound lanes that aimed at each other, they began to separate them by the 5-mile separation of doing up and downbound lanes. And it was only because of the Goodyear's loss that it presented people with enough interest, enough motivation to change the style of navigation on the Great Lakes. So she had a lot of historical importance to the Great Lakes as to what her impact was with the changes in navigation.
So how did you end up finding this one? This is one that when you sent me this side scan image, my mind was blown. I mean, that's about as perfect of an image as I've ever seen.
Yeah. We didn't know what we had for sure. We knew it was either that or the Hydrus at the time, because there's only 2 big freighters left out there at that point that we were aware of that it could be. And of course, made her dive and turned out to be the Goodyear. One of the interesting things about the Goodyear was extremely unusual. The only one that ever had this kind of design. She had a railroad car on the spar deck that was for the owner. Now, the thing with that the spar deck and the railroad car, I thought it was there. I thought I could see it on the side scan, but I wasn't too sure. Now, this is back when Viz is not so good. And we sent a team down that started at the stern and went down toward the bow. And by golly, that rail car was there, still mounted athwartships.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is that you can see how she's angled into the bottom. When you got up to the bow and you looked over the rail, the bottom of Lake Huron was 3 feet from the rail. In other words, she is set 35 to 40 feet buried into the bottom near the bow.
Wow. So she must have plunged in with a good deal of force.
Yeah, she did an enormous amount. As a matter of fact, if you work down inside the cargo hatches and inside them, I think the max depth is around 280. You're actually below the surface of Lake Huron.
Oh, wow. That's a deep wreck, though.
That's what I should say. The bell is still attached in place, hanging off the mast, and still there today. We found the compass was in a little box off to the side in the pilot house. We pulled it out and set it down, and the compass was still in amazingly good condition, even though it had been down there since 1910. You go ahead.
Looks like there was that's the big double wheel, the auxiliary wheel, huh?
Yeah, that is it's the stern at the stern, and the mast had laid back and across it and broke both of the wheels. There was also a wheelbarrow that was sitting up next to it too.
So the let's see, I've got another shot here, I think, of the wheel. Yeah, that's the one from the main wheel from the pilot house.
Yeah, that's just a nice. Yeah, it's just a great shot of the wheel and the pilot house. And of course, this is back before the zebras got to it. We've had some divers out there since then, and it's remarkable how much the zebras changed the character of the inside of the pilot house.
Wow.
Sadly, I should say.
Yeah, zebras are now I guess the quagga mussels they say now have taken the place of the zebra mussels, but it's not what it once was. But the visibility, is cleaned up. I guess if I had to, I don't know what I'd rather see, the wrecks with clean or the great visibility. It's a real trade-off.
Well, I think many of the old-time divers would probably tell you that, sometimes you get lucky and get a good viz day or two a year. And they might take that without zebra mussels or quaggas than they would to take them with quaggas today.
Yeah, definitely. So the next one that we would want to talk about is, a real big modern steel ore boat, the John Mcgeehan. And this is really was one of the biggest vessels still missing on the Great Lakes. Tell us a little bit about this one, Dave, and how you found her.
We found her in 1985. Didn't say anything about it for about a year. In 1986, when Wayne Brusate found the Regina, then we announced that we had also found the Mcgeehan, and seemed to be typical of any of these ships. Certainly the 6 that are on the U.S. side, every one of them was turtle that had been found up to that point. 5 out of the 6 had all been turtle. When you look at these, the emergency steering wheels here that are sent at the stern of the Mcgeehan, this essentially is the wreck's upside down, and they're buried into the floor of Lake Huron. So in order to take that picture, you'd snuggle up underneath the wreck, get as far as you could next to the wheel before you'd shoot your image. But it gives you a sense of how far she was twisted over. Virtually perfectly 100% upside down toward the bow, but toward the stern, bent and twisted slightly, so you could get access to some of the area underneath the stern cabins, etc.
So you're underneath the ship when this was taken.
Yes, yeah. It's you can get, like I say, it's snowy. You have to get a little tight. You snuggle up there to get that picture.
Wow.
She was carrying coal and was upbound at the time, of course. This diver peering inside one of the portholes. We think she probably floated a while, Brendan, before she sank. And one of the locations that she was located, her location was off of Port Hope, and the captain of the Mcgeehan was a fellow by the name of Dancing Chauncey Nye. He had the name Dancing because he liked the good life ashore. But the irony of being off of Port Hope 10 miles out is that's also where Chauncey Nye was born and raised, was off Port Hope, and his final resting place of the ship is directly off that point, Port Hope.
Oh, wow. Quite a coincidence.
So, yeah, funny.
Yeah, and then so I think there's only one of the big ships left from that storm. The Carruthers is the only one still missing. I guess she's probably in Canadian waters, is what most people tell me.
Yeah, I would agree that she was Canadian registry, was running on the Canadian side. It's likely that she will be in Canadian waters. Once we found the Mcgeehan, and of course the Regina had been found, it left one ship to be found that was in U.S. waters likely, and that would be the Hydras. And I'd always hoped that I'd lived long enough to find the Hydras so I could at least make a note that I'd found 2 of the Great Storm 1913 shipwrecks that were located on the U.S. side. And we actually managed to do that about 2015. And that's the exact first image we saw.
Wow.
Of the Hydra bottom. And we knew what we had when we had at that time. You could actually count the cargo hatches. And she was coming home. It was quite a discovery for us. Pretty excited about it. It was something we looked for many years. And at some point, Brendan, when you're searching, and you just don't know what you're going to find. But if you keep at it, sooner or later, some of these wrecks that are not where they're supposed to be, you find them.
Wow. And so how far away was she from where most people thought?
Oh God, probably 20 miles, 25 miles easy. And it's just a good example of the effort put in to find some of these wrecks. We've now, since '83, when I acquired the first Klein unit, we've now covered about 2,500 square miles of Lake Huron bottomland, which is about 25% of the U.S. side of Lake Huron.
That's an amazing amount of bottom.
Well, it's the reason some of them have been found. If the average person went out and started searching for them, it'd be a long time before you get to them, just depending on how much effort that you want to put in.
That's right. I can really respect that. I mean, my little eye shoots 400 feet aside, and I go out and I try to cover even a small grid with that. It takes forever. So to cover as much bottom as you guys did is just astounding to me. And this is your acquisition image. I mean, this is what you saw peel across the screen. That's got to have been an exciting, heart-pumping few moments.
Oh yeah, and it's really coincidentally, and things don't happen often this way. But I had taken a small GoPro camera, set it underneath the screen that we were looking at, and I was so happy to be sitting at the table at that moment. And so I got the actual video of our reactions when we saw it appear on the screen, and it's quite unique to have that. That whole expectation of seeing what we'd found at the right time. And the odds of me doing that were slim and none because I hadn't put a GoPro camera underneath that LCD screen before that point. That's the group there that found it: Greg Geiser, myself, Fred Nichols on the left, and in the background is Bob Martelli. But they're pretty tickled over it because that was a pretty major discovery. What turned out to be the last of the 13 storm shipwrecks that was on the U.S. side.
And for those of you who don't know, when Dave goes out, they bring 5 guys in a little boat and they go all day and all night, don't you, Dave? I mean, you guys search throughout the night.
We will run 20 if the weather permits, Brendan. The standard protocol is run 24 hours a day.
Wow. Very cool. And so this is what it looks like on the bottom.
Yeah. This is the pilot house of the Hydrus. It was still well intact, bent and twisted a little bit, but still amazingly well preserved. Now, the other thing that was kind of unusual about the Hydrus that we thought could happen, she was carrying iron ore and she was downbound. And we wondered if for some reason all the 5 of the 6, this being number 6, the previous 5 had all been turned turtle. We wondered if this would still be turtle given the amount of weight that she had in her hull from the iron ore. And it turns out she was not turtle, she was upright. So it makes it just a great classic shipwreck.
Sure, and there's her bell.
Yeah, the bell's still hanging on the mast, still in place today. That was a celebration out there after making the dive on it. And the fellow on the left there in the white T-shirt, Jared Daniel, he had actually made this little name board, Hydrus. He made it a couple of years earlier because he said, we're going to find it sooner or later. And then I want to make sure that I'm out there presenting the name board as part of the experience. And he's right. We did do it.
Very good story. So one of the ones that I'm most interested in that you found is this next one, the whaleback steamer, the Clifton. There's a family legend in my family. I think it's not a legend. I think it's true that my mom's husband, his grandfather was supposed to be on this ship and got sick and didn't make the voyage. And she went down on this voyage. And so quite a find, Dave. And this is not too long ago. When did you find this one?
Yeah, we found that in 17. Let's see, 17, 18. 17. There's several things of interest about the Clifton. First of all, she's the last whaleback, self-propulsion whaleback that you could possibly look for in the Great Lakes and still be missing and find it. She was about 330 feet long, as I recall. She had been converted with a unique tunnel scraping system to self-load, load, and unload. One of the things that happened to the whalebacks, which was a little bit unique, is they tended to go out of style because they didn't have the appropriate cargo hatches or proper design for use in the ports or for loading and unloading. So they had to be either refurbished or essentially scrapped. So they'd done some rebuilding of a new tunnel scraping system, put it in service, and she was loaded with aggregate and left. Oh boy, escapes me the port over in Wisconsin side. But she came around through the straits and on down off a 40-mile point. She was seen one last time, making good weather of it, even though water was coming over her hull. And she was never seen again. What was interesting about 40-mile point and where we found her, and this goes to show you the difficulty of looking for shipwrecks, she is almost 100 miles from her last sighting.
Wow.
So if you wanted to go out and look for the Clifton, and by the way, there was a project afoot up there by NOAA to go find the Clifton. Well, they were going to start out around 40-mile point. It had been a long time before they got to where it was located.
Sure.
So it goes to show you that if you stay with it, they can be found. But sometimes it'll be half a chance. And anybody who tells you that they always find what they're looking for, don't believe them.
So her bow looks like it's in pretty bad shape here. Did she? How did she end up like this on the bottom?
Yeah, we've looked at that, looked at the video, and her bow is horribly smashed. I mean, we have yet to find anchors and yet to find a number of things that you would expect to see. And we've managed to draw a conclusion based on how she lies as to what actually happened. First of all, there was always talk about the self-unloading equipment that was added. There was talk about the fact that that equipment could have broken free and swung out and caused her to be unstable and to sink. There was also the theory that, and I think the one that's probably right, is that ultimately you change the structural integrity of the ship by all the weight that was put on the upper part of it to aid the self-unloading system. And so our theory is that she's downbound and she's getting increasingly buffeted by the waves and winds that are coming. She's heading south. The waves and the winds are coming out of the west and northwest. And eventually she catches a really big one, starts to roll and starts to go down bow first and smacks into the bottom, probably at about a 40-degree angle, and crumples the first 30 or 40 feet of the bow. The rest of it kind of settles down to the floor of Lake Huron. And this was very brutally and very quick. There was just little chance of anybody surviving. And very few bodies were ultimately found, which I think says something about just the enormous gravity of the situation, how brutally fast she just disappeared off the surface of Lake Huron.
And how deep is she, Dave?
Boy, you asked me a question. 100, not all that bad, 180, I think.
180-ish, that area?
I lose track of them. I don't pay much attention to it unless I were diving them.
Honestly, I don't remember either. And, but I'm trying to get an idea. She's not real deep. She's a sport diving wreck.
Mixed gas. I guess we got into mixed gas finally at the end of the stuff. But there you got Chad Bruner diving and running a DPV with it. Big enough to do that. 300 foot long. So, you have to move a little bit. You could do that well with a DPV.
Makes sense. There's a wheel.
Yeah, and that's just a couple of feet off the bottom. If you think in terms of how she was partially bent and twisted and laid over on her side, the wheel's just a couple feet off the bottom.
There's the self-unloading boom.
Yeah, so you see how it's separated from the hull, and it did not, based on what we see there, Brendan, she did not fly out away from it. She stayed attached until it impacted with the bottom, which told us that the self-unloading system itself, outside of weight issues, was not the reason that she turtled and sank.
I see. And she was carrying stone, and then you can see down there pouring out of the hatches. Yeah, you sure can. They spilled out, the hatch covers blew off, and of course, spilled out along the bottom. And then we have the propeller and rudder. Yeah, that's a classic, just a good shot of what the rudder looks like. Notice it's headed straight forward. All the blades on the propeller are intact. The rudder is straight forward, and I can just imagine when she started to go, they had no chance even to hardly turn the wheel to stop it. So, Dave, this is a wreck that I know a lot of people had wanted to find and people had been searching for. And I think like a lot of the wrecks you found these because you basically mow the lawn and paint the bottom and you find what you find. Would that be an accurate statement?
That is today, Brendan. It wasn't always true because you can do your research, narrow a target area to go look. But what really got us off onto more blanket grid searching was really way back to the Minnedosa when we found it. And what I mean by that is that by the time we finally found the Minnedosa, we had covered 600 square miles of Lake Huron in looking for. And at that point, it began to be a series of building blocks of working additional grids to see what else was there.
I suppose Lake Huron, I mean, it was a transit lake where vessels were coming, from the Straits or, the Lake Superior, the Detour area, and then down to Port Huron. And there were those basically shipping lanes. And if you cover them, you're going to find shipwrecks.
Yeah, and we've done that pretty well by now.
I'll say.
The trouble is that not all of them are in the freighter lanes, I can assure you.
Oh, right, exactly. So, Dave, how many wrecks do you think you have found in your career, just off the top of your head?
Well, I'm guessing somewhere less than 100. Now, that includes the work I did in Lake Erie with this Save Ontario shipwreck people. I spent several years over there working off of Point Pelee looking for shipwrecks on their behalf. I spent 14 or 15 years with Valerie looking for shipwrecks in Lake Michigan. And I did a little work in Lake Superior back for Tom Farnquist years ago. So if you aggregate it all, then it's somewhere 90 plus.
Wow. And so have you always pretty much used a Klein since you switched to side scan after the Westmar?
Yeah, it's been a Klein unit. Now, I've used several derivatives of Klein, meaning that I had the early paper Klein, the wet paper Kleins, of course, which I bought the first one in '83. And of course, that's very antiquated by today's standards. But I still have a freezer full of wet paper that I could go out and use today with one of the older equipment. And then finally, I met up with a fellow that I admire greatly by the name of Ralph Wilbanks. Now, his fame, of course, is not the monitor I got. I'm trying to think of the name of it now.
Clive Cussler.
Yeah, Clive. Well, he did Clive Cussler. I'm trying to think of the name. It escapes me now. The name of the ship that he found, the submarine, Hunley.
The monitor.
Yeah. The monitor was. He was involved in finding the
Hunley.
Yeah, Ralph Wilbanks. Yeah.
The Hunley.
Anyway, I met Ralph very surreptitiously on just an informal basis and got to know him. And he was up here looking for Flight 2501 in Lake Michigan for several years on behalf of Clive. And we used to go out with him some. But anyway, damn good side scan operator. The guy is really good, very capable. And he had Gary Kozak, probably the best side scan operator in the world, reconfigure one of his units and convert it to a digital hybrid. And he had that for a while. And then he ended up having to upgrade equipment because regardless of the best skill you got, if you work for some government agencies, if you don't have A, B, C, and D, then you don't qualify for bidding. So he had to buy upgrade equipment. And from that, I managed to buy his digital hybrid unit that he had put together by Gary Kozak. And so that's how I transferred into the digital game, or I still be running paper today.
I see.
So, as a matter of fact, about 4 years ago, I was over in Lake Michigan with Valerie, and I'm running wet paper over there that running side scan wet paper, and we found the John Moran in about 370 feet of water.
You found that using wet paper? No kidding.
Yeah, which is pretty antiquated, but it goes to show you that the matter's being out there and using the equipment. It has a hell of a lot less to do with people who sit around and don't do it.
That's right. Yeah. So this is something that I know a lot of our viewers will be interested in, Dave. When you search with the Klein, that's a 50 kilohertz Klein, right? Still, or the fish, that you use? Yeah,
I run with a 50. I run with 100. Now, the 100 I've got is a 3/4 degree beam, which is kind of a special application 100. There weren't too many of them made. That's a pretty good unit too.
So how far out do you generally look with those? Like when you're searching in deep cold water?
If I'm in deep cold water, the minimum we'll run 1,000 foot aside. if the conditions are right. When we found the John Moran over in Lake Michigan, I think I was running 1,100, 1,000, about 1,150 foot of sight, as I recall. So that was 2,300 foot of swath when we found it.
Wow, that's a half a mile.
Yeah, very close to it.
Yeah, and if you in shallower water, I suppose the thermocline and other factors limit your seeing, and then you dial it in to whatever your maximum that you're seeing well is.
Yeah, optimal conditions allow you to push those ranges, Brendan. But in reality, when you get into bad bottom, shallow water, thermocline, all affect your capability to reach any great distance. And oftentimes you have to modify your surveying to accommodate the fact you're going to be limited. And one of the real problems you get in all the lakes is that you can have thermocline come and go. And if you're trying to make a good, clean 10 or 12 mile run, single line pass, and you can run in and out of thermocline because of the difference in the conditions of the water column. And those things can just raise hell with you because you're looking back and you can say, my God, that thermocline's so bad, I can't see what's there. So then you begin to realize that you have blocks that you are not necessarily what you need for effective surveying. So you have your limitations. So the earlier you get in the year out, the colder the water, the flatter the bottom, and the less conditions on the surface, the farther you're going to see and how well you're going to do.
Yep, definitely. So Dave, we're coming to the end of our time, but we have a question here that somebody has asked, and it's kind of an interesting one, and I'll throw it out there for you.
Sure.
Saying, well, we're all getting older, you might not be around forever. Do you have any secret wreck locations that you haven't released?
Any secret wreck locations? Well, we've left some out there just because we never dove them. Yeah. Now, that was several years ago when we find busted up schooners, look at them and say we didn't want to waste our time. And that's back when Biz was terrible, of course. Yeah. So there's some of those laying out there, but I'm not too much in the history game. I think if we, I don't have any problem sharing information with people, Brendan.
Yeah. So the short answer is
I've left the hydrous out there. We haven't given the location of the hydrous out, nor the Keystone State, which was that's another interesting story, but that's for another time. The Keystone State lost with all hands in the 1800s, 1850s, 60s, excuse me, 1860s.
Sure. So let's see. Any others? I think that's about it for the questions. But that's an interesting one that I knew somebody would want to ask probably. And we all have sites that we can't talk about. There are reasons for that. That's part of the things a lot of people don't realize is oftentimes, when we find a site, we're not the only ones involved, or there are other entanglements, or there are reasons. And so there are wrecks that I found that I can't talk about for a number of reasons. And it's not because we want private playgrounds. It's because it gets political sometimes, and there are other reasons. Put it that way.
Oh yeah. Well, and the fact that if you go out and spend $5,000, well, it's not uncommon to run $3,000 or $4,000 worth of gas searching, and you put that money into it, and somebody says, "Well, I'd like to know where the wreck's at," and I said, "Well, how about sharing some of that cost with me on gas?" And of course, then people get kind of quiet. They think, it's much like writing a book, Brendan. You write a book, you're the author, and somebody else would take and change the author's name. You say, well, maybe that's not a fair thing to do.
Yeah, definitely, Dave. Well, we're up on time here. I want to remind everybody that we have a Zoom room coming up after this, and I'm going to send the link out to everybody. But before we do that, Dave, I want to thank you so much for doing this and for agreeing to be on the show.
Well, thank you, Brendan. I'm glad to do it. A little bit of Great Lakes history, and just want to give you a little perspective on the long game of the shipwreck hunting activity.
Definitely. And it's really a pleasure to talk to you and to have, kind of one of the guys who's really involved in the formation of what we do, and to walk through this history for me is just fascinating, because obviously I've been doing this a while too. And I kind of grew up, following your work and the work of the other people that are sort of in your peer group. So thank you again, Dave, for doing this. And this is going to be a really important piece of history that we've documented here. For those of you who, want to share this, I'm going to be uploading this to our YouTube channel. Feel free to subscribe to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research YouTube channel. You can share this video anywhere you want. Been a fascinating discussion, Dave. Thanks again. And For those of you, stay tuned. I'll be announcing our guest for the 2 weeks from tonight coming up here. And again, thank you for joining us, and have a good night, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Brendan. Take care.